are moments in life that shake you to your core. Moments that force you to face the past, whether you're ready to or not. It doesn't matter how much time has passed, how much healing you think you've done, because when that moment hits, it's like you're right back there, frozen, trapped in the cycle you swore you escaped. For me, that moment came when my younger brother was caught in an FBI sting, thinking he was messaging an underage girl. I was at the start of a lawsuit, already drowning in stress when I got the news. And in that moment, I wasn't just a woman dealing with legal battles, or a sister dealing with a scandal. I was 8 years old again. I was standing in my father's house. I was trapped in a cycle of silence, fear, and betrayal. Only this time, I had a choice. This time, I could break it. Welcome back to Living Richardson. Today's episode is deeply personal. We're talking about family, trauma, and moments that force you to face everything you've tried to leave behind. If you've ever had a moment like that, where your past crashes into your present, I want you to know you're not alone. Before we begin, I want to issue a content warning for this episode. We will be discussing childhood sexual abuse, familial trauma, and the impact of generational cycles of harm. If these topics are triggering or difficult for you, please take care of yourself. Whether that means skipping this episode, listening with a trusted friend, or taking breaks as needed. Your well-being is the most important thing. That being said, I share my story not to dwell on the past, but to shine a light on what so many people have lived through in silence. If you've experienced something similar, I want you to know you're not alone. And you deserve to be heard. I was 8 years old when it started. Every other weekend, I visited my dad's house. And every other weekend until I was 10 years old, my older half-brother sexually abused me. When I finally told my mom, CPS got involved, but what should have been a moment of protection felt like another violation. The questions, the investigations. I was just a kid, and I was the one being put under a microscope. My abuser, he never faced real consequences. And I learned very quickly that speaking up didn't always mean people would listen. What haunts me the most is how many adults were in my life, and not one of them protected me. My dad was there, but he wasn't really there. He was either asleep or distracted, completely unaware of what was happening under his own roof. And my mother, she did report it, but I don't think she ever truly saw what it did to me. Reporting something is not the same as protecting a child. Protecting means standing in the fire with them, making sure they feel safe, making sure they know they aren't alone. I never got that. Instead, I was left to process it on my own. My mom was overwhelmed. My dad didn't want to believe it. And CPS, well, CPS did what CPS does. They showed up, they asked their traumatic questions, they wrote their reports, and then they left. But the damage stayed. I was still expected to exist in this family, still expected to be around people who had already failed me. The message was loud and clear. This happened, but now we move on. No one sat me down and said, "You are safe now. This will never happen again." No one looked me in the eyes and asked, "What do you need?" And so I carried it alone. I carried it in the way I stopped trusting adults, in the way I became hyper-aware of danger when no one else seemed to notice it. I carried it in the way I learned that just because people say they love you does not mean they'll protect you. And I think that's why when my younger brother was caught, I couldn't just move on. I couldn't let silence win again. Because if no one was going to break the cycle for me when I was a kid, then I damn sure was going to break it now. Fast forward to my 30s, at the start of the Basin War lawsuit. While being drugged through a legal battle and enduring harassment by my next-door neighbor, the FBI showed up at my mother's doorstep. My 21-year-old brother was communicating online with someone he thought was a 14-year-old. Instead, it was an undercover FBI agent. It felt like I had been punched in the gut. Because suddenly I wasn't just dealing with my brother's actions, I was reliving what had been done to me. And my own daughter was 11 years old at this time. Only 1 year older than I was when my abuse stopped. All I could think was, not again. Not this time. I am 11 years older than my youngest brother. As the oldest and only daughter of a single mother, I took on a role that was not mine to carry. I felt responsible for him, not just in the way an older sibling looks out for their younger sibling, but in a way that felt parental. Our mother struggled in ways that left gaps, and I stepped into them, whether I wanted to or not. But the thing about broken families and toxic cycles is that they don't stop just because one person sees them. They continue unless someone makes the conscious, painful effort to break them. And my brother, he didn't get that chance. He had his own child when he was 13 years old. A child having a child. And when I look back on that, I don't see a reckless boy making bad choices. I see a kid who was set up to fail. 13 is far too young to understand what it means to be a parent, far too young to be making choices with lifelong consequences. But the reality is, he was programmed by the same environment I was. We grew up watching dysfunction, watching adults make choices based on survival instead of stability, watching relationships built on control, desperation, and neglect instead of love and security. So when it happened to him, when he became a father, before he even became a teenager, I knew it wasn't just his mistake. It was a failure of the adults around him. And what happens to a child who is forced to become a parent before their brain is even done developing? Their entire mental programming shifts. His idea of relationships, of consent, of responsibility, of what's normal, was shaped by what happened to him. It's not an excuse for what he did later, but it is a reason. He wasn't just a villain in this story. He was a victim of the same cycles I had been fighting my whole life to escape. This was when everything started making sense. Why I was so triggered, why my reaction was so intense. It wasn't just about my younger brother's crime. It was about my past. It was about the 8-year-old girl who no one fought for. But it wasn't just about my brother. I also had to face the way my mother responded. Instead of holding him accountable, she defended him. She thought the FBI was twisting the narrative. She even told me she saw a picture of the girl and she didn't look 14, as if looking older than her age somehow made what he did okay. As if this wasn't about the power imbalance, the manipulation, the fact that he believed he was talking to a child. That moment, that sentence, it broke something in me. Because suddenly, I saw her clearly. The woman who had always excused men's behavior. The woman who always looked the other way. The woman who had let so many things happen to me, and now she was doing the same thing all over again, just to a different girl, to someone else's daughter. That's when I finally set my boundaries with her, and this time I stuck to them. The FBI's Children's Services interviewed me because my brother and his daughter, my niece, were living with my mom at the time. At first, they wanted to place my niece with me, but they also didn't want to remove her from her home if they didn't need to. I confirmed that it would be in her best interest to stay in her own home because her life was entirely made up of instability. No matter how I felt, my mother has always been the one stable person in my niece's life. my niece has a deep attachment to my mother. But my involvement did not end there. I was made backup caregiver, which meant that for over 2 years, it was my responsibility to ensure my niece was safe in my mother's care. Over those 2 years, the CPS visits continued. More reports, more concerns. Meanwhile, my younger brother finally pled guilty to federal charges. And in the summer of 2024, he began his 5-year prison sentence. Everything came to a head, and I had to ask myself, how much more of myself can I keep giving to a family that never protected me? The answer was clear. In order to protect my children, I had to step away from my mother and my niece. It wasn't easy. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was necessary. Because I had spent my whole life fighting to be seen by my mother, to be protected by her, to be enough for her. And after everything, after CPS, after the FBI, after years of watching history repeat itself, I finally saw the truth. I had never been the problem. She is the one unwilling to change. So I stopped trying. I walked away. I chose myself. I chose my family. I chose my daughter. For a long time, I thought surviving was enough. I thought if I buried it deep enough, if I focused on being a good mom, a good wife, a good person, that the past wouldn't touch me. But that's not how trauma works. It waits. It waits for a moment that feels eerily familiar. It waits until the stakes are high enough that you have no choice but to finally face it. When my younger brother was arrested, when my mother defended him, when CPS gave me the responsibility of ensuring my niece's safety, it wasn't just a situation I had to handle. It was a mirror, a reflection of everything I had already lived through. The abuse I endured as a child, the lack of protection, the excuses, the silence. It was all happening again. And in that moment, I had 2 choices. I could continue the pattern, pretend like it wasn't my problem, let my mother's twisted version of love cloud my judgment, or I could finally say, this ends with me. It's a strange kind of grief, realizing you will never get the mother you deserved. That the person who should have been your protector was never built to carry that role. That no matter how hard you fight for them to see you, for them to change, they won't. And that's a painful reality to accept. Because once you do, you also have to accept that you have to walk away. So I did. I walked away from my mother, from the need for her approval, from the false hope that she would ever become someone different. I let go of the dream that she would finally fight for me the way I had spent my life fighting for her. And instead, I turned toward my own children. I look at my children, and I know they will never feel the way I did. They will never wonder if I am on their side. They will never be left unprotected, dismissed, or forced to carry burdens that don't belong to them. Because I refuse to hand them the pain that was handed to me. Breaking the cycle isn't just about cutting people off. It's about choosing differently, over and over again. It's about choosing to listen when my children say they're upset instead of telling them to get over it. It's about choosing to validate their feelings, to teach them that their voice matters instead of silencing them like I was silenced. It's about teaching them that love is not something they have to earn, that their worth is not conditional. It's about giving them a foundation of safety and trust so they never have to question where they stand. These are the moments when I feel the weight of it. When I feel the fear of messing up, of letting the past creep in, of not being enough. But the difference now is I recognize the fear for what it is. A ghost of the past, not a prediction of the future. And every time I choose patience over anger, communication over silence, and love over control, I remind myself I am breaking the cycle. My children will never know the version of me that my mother created. They will only know the version of me that I created for them. And that is what healing looks like. For so long, I thought healing would feel like a victory, like a moment where I could stand on top of everything I survived and say, I won! But healing isn't about winning. It's about releasing. It's about unlearning. It's about looking at everything that tried to break you and saying, you don't own me anymore. I used to believe that breaking the cycle meant saving everyone. My mother, my brother, my niece. I thought if I just fought hard enough, if I just gave enough of myself, I could somehow undo generations of damage. But I've learned that you can't save people who don't want to be saved. You can't make someone see the truth if they're committed to the lie. And at some point, you have to decide that your healing matters more than their comfort. Walking away from my mother was never about hate. It was about love. Loving myself enough to say no more. Loving my children enough to make sure they never experience what I did. Loving my younger self enough to finally give her the protection she never had. I used to grieve what I lost, but now I celebrate what I built. Healing isn't just about the past. It's about the future. It's about looking at my children and knowing that their childhood is already so different from mine. It's about knowing that they will never have to question their worth, their safety, or their place in my heart. It's about breaking every chain that tried to hold me down and choosing every single day to be the mother I always needed. If you're listening to this and you feel trapped in the cycle, if you're carrying the weight of a family that never protected you, if you feel like you have to be the one to fix what others refuse to acknowledge, hear me when I say this. You don't have to keep playing a role you never auditioned for. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You don't have to stay in spaces that make you shrink. You are allowed to choose yourself. And when you do, that's not selfish. That's survival. That's healing. That's freedom. Before we go, I want to share something that has been in the works for a long time. The Silent Mother Project is officially launching as a nonprofit, and we have some incredible things coming up. If this episode resonated with you, if you're someone who's trying to break the cycle, heal, or just find people who get it, I want to invite you to join us. We have a private forum where you can connect with others in a safe, supportive space. We're going to be launching online meetings, and if you're in Northeast Ohio, we are going to be planning in-person meetings as well. And this summer, we are looking at hosting our first fundraising event, a chance to come together, raise awareness, and continue this mission. Please visit thesilentmotherproject.com to join the private forum and stay updated on everything we're building. Because healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in community. If this episode spoke to you, send me a message, share your story, or just know I see you. Until next time, take care, be kind to yourself, and remember, the past shapes us, but it does not define us. Thanks for listening.